My guest today is Donna Klassen, who co-founded Let's Talk Menopause, which is a nonprofit dedicated to improving menopause understanding in healthcare. After facing an accelerated menopause journey due to an estrogen-positive breast cancer diagnosis and surgeries, and drawing from her experience at the Motherhood Center of New York, Donna passionately champions better guidance and support for women undergoing menopause. Welcome to Lifeology.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You know, it's interesting, Donna. I've received many pitches for my show about menopause. What's happening in the world today that there seems more of an uptick in it being more popular, or more publicized, rather?
Well, I think that this generation, Generation X, is wants to do things differently than our mothers and aunts and grandmothers did,
Sure.
which really happened in secrecy and behind closed doors. It really wasn't talked about at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so with menopause, even though it's a natural stage of life, comes many symptoms, and the symptoms can last 4 to 10 years prior to your last period. So even though
Oh,
it's a
wow.
natural phase of life, there's lots of symptoms associated with
Sure.
that, with the ups and downs of estrogen and with the decline in estrogen. And so those symptoms can be long and they can be really difficult for people, and they can impact many parts of one's body and health.
Interesting. So if I remember correctly, I think you're also a licensed professional counselor as well. What is the mental health status for many individuals who have the perception of menopause? And so the people who haven't yet experienced menopause are people who are experiencing. Is there a certain way of thinking as far as one's vitality, virility when it comes to menopause?
I think, unfortunately, it has a negative connotation,
Sure.
almost like that it's the end of a woman's life and it's sort of the end of their reproductive years. And people often dread menopause because, for women, the focus is a lot, it's been a lot around being beautiful or being young or being, right?
Yeah.
And we really want to change that you can really live your best
Sure.
life. We are living longer, and there are treatments, and you can feel better and you can come out of this stronger, and not to dread
Sure.
it, not to fear it.
Sure.
And to make sure that you're getting the right information. And unfortunately, 20 years ago, in 2002, there was a big study, and that study really put the kibosh on hormone therapy and made it become like a fear-based
interesting.
thing. Yeah. And so we really, scientists and researchers and doctors have really relooked at that study, and there's been new studies since then, but the perception around it has really made it difficult, and it really set back women in many ways for the last 20 years.
Oh, gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Sure. Now, let's talk menopause. Let's talk more about that. So the nonprofit, how did that come about?
So after my own experience, and I work in, like I said, I'm a therapist, I'm a social worker, I do skills-based therapy, CBT, DBT, and I worked around postpartum depression. And we know that there are 3 windows of vulnerability for women in mental health. One being the onset of the period, the other being pregnancy and postpartum, which we've heard a lot more about in the last 20 years. And the third that people don't know about is perimenopause. And that's when there's lots of symptoms of irritability, fatigue, poor word finding, cognitive issues, and heart symptoms, heart palpitations that can be that can look like other symptoms. And so women don't know. And also doctors, if you can believe this, only get about 1 hour of training on menopause in medical school right now.
Wow. So let's go back for a second here, because I want to first find out the origins. So let's talk menopause. How you're telling me the understanding of it, which is great. I want to hear more about that. But when it comes to the aspects of when a woman has her period, the postpartum, et cetera, there are different aspects of what's like premenstrual dysphoric disorder. There's many different aspects that can happen when a woman has her cycle. And so in that, how does a person differentiate between what role they're necessarily at, either the postpartum versus the perimenopause? I mean, how does a person really recognize their symptomology to understand they are perhaps transitioning into that next stage?
Right. Well, oftentimes it happens. The average age for the final menstrual period is 51, 52.
Okay.
That's the average.
Okay.
However, people can have that earlier. And the reason we started Let's Talk Menopause, which is to answer your first question, is because people don't know these things, right? Yeah. And so because it's been taboo, and we're not selling anything. And I think, we really want to make sure through education and through advocacy that women are getting the healthcare that they need. And that's really our mission, is to make sure that women and doctors and everyone knows about this stage of life. And so, so sort of getting back to that other question, so symptoms can start 4 to 10 years prior. So symptoms can start in your late 30s, early 40s. And part of the problem is you don't know what's going on with your body. You don't know, is this stress? Is this work
Correct.
stress? Is this relationship issues? Is this caring for my parents? What's going on? So that's part of it, is you don't know, and you don't know when that final period is going to be. So perimenopause is that 4 to 10 years prior. Most of the symptoms happen in that last like 2 to 3 years prior. They can be difficult. And the other issue is that not everyone experiences the same thing. It's not a one size fits all. So some people have a wide array of symptoms with increased severity, and some people have a moderate amount of symptoms. But unfortunately, people don't even know the basics, like what are the symptoms. And then there are some long-term health risks. So at this point, with the lack of estrogen, it affects our bones and our hearts and other issues.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things about Let's Talk Menopause is you have so much education to teach people. Well, that kind of transitions to the next question I asked. What sets Let's Talk Menopause, your nonprofit, what sets it apart from other organizations that may be talking about menopause as well?
Well, there's only 2 of us. So there's very few nonprofits. There's a National Menopause Foundation. Course, Right. So we're a nonprofit. We also really, if you go to our website, letstalkmenopause.org, we created the website so that it's younger, so that we're reaching people prior to entering the phase of life. Smart. And so it's a really vibrant, young-looking, and accessible website. And so lots of people can go to different websites and get information about menopause, but it's often done in more scientific doctor language. And this is really, we're really talking and we're doing things more accessible, and our programs are more accessible. We have monthly menopause talks where we have best-in-class doctors, nurse practitioners, and other providers doing a webinar, doing a menopause talk, but doing it in a way that people can access that information and also ask questions. So they're giving access to doctors, because we don't have access to doctors. Going to a doctor, you don't have access to them.
Exactly. What I think is really great as well is the preemptive aspect of it, of really helping people recognize before the menopause, for the perimenopause aspects of it, to really understand it as you transition in whatever phase of life you're in as well. Which also, I guess, makes me think there's different socioeconomic individuals in the world today. Some have more access to healthcare, some do not. And so in that, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to educate people from whatever level they're at, to be able to understand what's happening, to create that agency, to create the language, to be able to talk to their primary doctor about that as well.
Right. The more we have people going in and asking their doctors and their providers questions about this, the more the doctors are going to be spurred on to have to learn about it. And you're right. Access is different for people, but I will say that what I'm seeing is that access for people on all ranges is difficult. People in New York City can't get appointments with a menopause-informed provider because there are very few menopause-informed providers.
Wow.
And it's all really falling on OBGYNs that are already strained and stressed. And so really, this is a whole medical provider and other providers, including psychiatrists and therapists and counselors and physical therapists who don't know about this and need to be educated about it.
Now, earlier you said that doctors only get about one hour of education when it comes to menopause?
That is correct. So after 2002, after 2002, after the big WHI study, menopause also got taken out of the curriculum in most medical schools. And so on average, doctors, including OBGYNs, are getting 1 hour of menopause training for a phase of life that lasts 40 until, So that is not good. Let's just say that. Now,
let's just talk about the whole aspect of that. I mean, obviously, that's not my specialty, but I know that in fact, one of my CEUs, I took it for a menopause. It was a 10 hour continuing education. So I got 10 hours of learning more about menopause than apparently a doctor who specializes in that as well. Well, help me understand the knowledge or the reasoning behind that. I mean, I don't know if you know, but just how does it even make sense to take that out of the curriculum?
It happened
even
at
speculation,
a time.
It's fine, but.
Well, it happened. I learned from Dr. Mary Jane Minkin from Yale. What happened is after that study, they also were medical schools needed to cut the curriculum because doctors didn't have enough hours. And so that just sort of happened at the same exact time. Now people can get certified. So there are certified menopause practitioners through it. So it's through the National American Menopause Society, which is now rebranded its name to the Menopause Society. So there are these providers, and people can find those on our website, those providers. But it certainly is not everyone. And what we hear from people is they often go to their doctor's office say they're 47 years old, they're having symptoms, and their doctor tells them, you're too young to be going through menopause. And that is not true because, again, the symptoms start, so they're not getting the basic information. Right? So the more we know about our symptoms, the easier it is to have them. If you know irritability is a symptom, instead of blaming yourself and sort of saying like what's going on and having all these worries about it, then you know. If you know that increased tearfulness, difficult sleeping, and hot flashes. And hot flashes, they're not just that you're hot. Yeah. I think people often dismiss it as like, oh, that's what it is, right? And hot flashes really they're a very intense sensation that comes up through your body like a ball of fire, and it comes up through your body, and you become red and start sweating. Now you can imagine you're in a meeting and this happens to you. What do you do? Right? You're on TV. Yeah, exactly. You're on the air, right? Tamsin Fadell, who is one of she's our ambassador. She's a journalist and she's on TV. And these are the things that happened to her. She could not go on air due to her symptoms and didn't know what was happening. So so people don't know. And part of it is that you don't know what you don't know. And so one of the things about starting a nonprofit on menopause, right, is people are like, well, why? Because this is a natural phase of life. And it's something that can be very difficult for people. So I also see people in my private practice who have a lot of health anxiety, who have they say, I've never been as anxious before. I've never worried so much. I've never been able to not function as much. People are leaving the workforce at high rates, and we can't afford to lose women who have a ton of experience. And so there's been a lot of articles about that recently, because, all of a sudden you start having difficulty finding words, and all of a sudden you think, I'm not as capable. I can't do this. Yeah. And yet it's word finding, right? There's ways to address that and to deal with that. But when you don't know what's happening to you, you often get very scared.
Yes. And I think also talking to a doctor, and the doctor, says you're either too young or maybe diagnose you with something different. And of course you're going to agree with that because it's professional. So to help people really understand that perhaps that person is incorrect or perhaps they're uninformed. How do you, I guess specifically, how do you really help the people find the ability to verbalize their symptoms or verbalize that? And let's say they don't have a menopause doctor, a doctor that's licensed with that or credentialed with the menopause. Can you help them through that?
So we don't necessarily deal with people individually on what's going on with them, but we let them know what the stages are.
Gotcha.
On our website, we have and the symptoms, right? We have a whole list of symptoms. And so really menopause is a diagnosis by looking at your age, by looking at where you are in the life cycle, right? By oftentimes period changes are one of the first changes. Either the period gets longer, it gets shorter. Some women bleed for a very long time, and that could be incredibly disruptive. Imagine being at work and bleeding almost every single day while you're at work and having to navigate that. And also, worrying that something's wrong with you.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Right.
You find that isolation, I'm sure, as well, because if you think there's something wrong with you and no one they try to explain your symptoms away and then, like I said, misdiagnosed. Yeah, that can feel very lonely. That can feel very disheartening in many different ways. So I'm really glad you guys have the education for these individuals, for all women as well. I've heard some of the things in the press though. Haven't you guys won some awards or been seen more in the public of late?
So menopause in general has been, the last year in particular, has really been highlighted.
Sure.
Myself, I was named a top menopause advocate and a top health influencer. So that's been fantastic. Thank you. So really menopause is at the forefront, but we have so much work to do. So women have been underfunded. The research has been underfunded. Women were not in research studies until the early 90s. And menopause in particular has not been researched.
Really?
And so there needs to be, So we really need more money for research. So part of our work is also doing advocacy work to make sure that this is not just talking, right? So we certainly need to talk more about it and let people know that they're not alone, and that there's treatment and that they can feel better. And then we have to make sure that menopause, that medical providers are trained, that the mental health community is trained, and that there is that money for research so that women can get that there can be more treatments for. We actually just found out why there's hot flashes. This just happened in the last couple of years. So we didn't even know why they existed and what was the mechanism that happened.
Interesting.
So there's a lot more to learn.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Now, are there support groups that you all offer as well for individuals who are experiencing this?
So we don't offer support groups in particular. We are 3 years old and we're focusing on work on education and advocacy. I have been doing in my private practice a support group for NYU and we might want to roll that out.
Yeah,
However, if we end up sort of doing that, we're not being able to see
of course, of course.
to everybody.
Yes.
So there are certainly places that people can go for
Mm-hmm.
support. There's online forums. There's a way to do that. I would also just suggest people that are going through this to talk to their friends, to talk to their family, to talk to others that might be going through it. What we know is that once people start talking about it, they feel less alone, and then they realize
It's
like, oh,
normalized.
this is something that everyone's going through, right? It's
Yeah.
acknowledged, right? They're
Exactly.
validated,
Yeah.
right?
And I think also, from a support system, someone like myself who may know someone going through that. I mean, to be able to support them, for me to be able to find the language, for me to be able to understand perhaps the symptomology of it and how I can support, as opposed to just negating it or minimizing it as well. So it's good to know that I'm assuming that in your system as well, as you roll things out, there'll be more aspects of the support aspect for the wraparound individuals who may be supporting the person who's experiencing menopause.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that the support needs to be there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how do we build something like that out in a way that I think first and foremost we have to train professionals, right? Because
Yes.
if it needs to be run by a professional, that the professionals don't know about how to do that, right? So it's and to really make sure that one of the things about the last year in particular is that a lot of companies have started, which is great, and people don't have to spend a lot of money on treatment, and just to really be mindful of that sometimes. To really make sure that they're researching what is beneficial and
cost
what is not, because right.
I understand that. Now, in your situation, you were diagnosed with cancer, and so your journey happened much earlier. I'm sure that happens for many people as well, that their menopause journey happens at an earlier time. Has that happened for you, and as I said, for other people as well? How did that kind of change your perspective of what menopause means as you experienced it much earlier than I suppose you should have?
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting. It was actually around the same time. So it happened when I was 52.
Oh, okay.
So that is the average age.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But surgical menopause. So I went into surgical menopause. So I had my ovaries out, which has often has more symptoms when when it happens abruptly. Mm-hmm. And then breast cancer survivors, many of us are on something called an aromatase inhibitor, which blocks all of our estrogen. Mm-hmm. So we basically go into what I call menopause on steroids. So my symptoms became a lot worse. So that was fantastic. But people who do go through it early, and there are people, one of our co-founders had something called POI, which is premature ovarian insufficiency. So she got her last period at the end of her 30s. And she was often also dismissed from her menopause, her GYN at the time. But at that point, the doctors now know and should know that really they should be put on hormone therapy until at least their early 50s when they're supposed to, because our bones need estrogen.
Oh, that's fair.
So one of the things that people don't realize are the long-term health risks. And one of those things is bones and osteoporosis. So we lose 20% of our bone mass in those first 2 years after post-menopause. The other issue that people don't know about are the genitourinary symptoms of menopause. What used to be called vaginal atrophy is now called, it's an umbrella term now, it's called the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. And that includes vaginal dryness, increased urinary leaking and frequency, increased UTIs, which is a huge health risk, right? A lot of older women often have, and that is because the vaginal wall becomes thin and it's easier to sort of, and unlike some of the symptoms that happen in that late perimenopause, which often go away, GSM is a chronic progressive chronic and progressive condition. And so it does not go away without treatment. And so,
interesting. Okay, without the treatment.
So if men had painful sex, I wonder what would happen. And would we still be going through that, right? Probably not.
Probably not. You're absolutely right.
Probably not. and low libido, right? So that's another symptom that happens is low libido, right? So,
interesting.
Yeah. So people don't know that these are symptoms of menopause, and that there are some actually with vaginal dryness, there are some very easy solutions, including
Workarounds
vaginal
for it, yeah.
localized estrogen, that many of our doctors talk about. And yeah, so that is something that people don't know about, and including, and I think when you're talking about access to care and access to information, I would say that nobody has access to this information. From when I go back on my college visits and talk to my fellow peers, none of them have heard about GSM and what happens post-menopause. I will say that people of color often go through, they have hot flashes for longer, and it starts earlier. So there are some differences in what happens to people. But again, so much of this we don't know. We don't know because it hasn't been studied.
And that's one of the reasons why Let's Talk Menopause is there, to be able to create the funding, or go to the legislator to be able to talk about all these different aspects to get the funding for that. Right. Now, I really appreciate all the different aspects that we've talked about. As we wrap up here in just a second, I know that any person can go to letstalkmenopause.org, I believe it is, and find out this information, be able to reach out to their healthcare providers as well. But all this information is at their fingertips. They can research it, look it up, and I'm assuming you continue to update your website as you get the information as well.
We do. Yeah. So people can go to letstalkmenopause.org to find out more about the symptoms, stages, and treatment options, and also to find a menopause certified physician. We also have a podcast, and people can go and listen to our podcast, Hello Menopause, and visit us on social media at Let's Talk Menopause. Our social media handle.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate this information. I mean, obviously it's not firsthand for me, but I'm really appreciative that my viewers and listeners will be able to have this information. I'm sure you've taught them so much information that they didn't have access to before. So once again, thank you for everything you do with Let's Talk Menopause. But thank you for being a guest on my show today. I really appreciate that. My viewers and listeners also know that if you can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and I'll connect you with Let's Talk Menopause. Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.